And there are no shortcuts with any of this. You got to put in the real work. You got to put in the time. And I think, the learning process is just time. I was thinking about this driving away from the gym this morning, like someone that's really good at Olympic weightlifting, like the snatch or other similar moves, like that takes years to perfect and move the barbell efficiently.
Welcome back to the Intelligent Conversations podcast. Today, I have the honor to learn from Erik Scott. Erik is a systems engineer, mindset coach, and founder of Energized Dad. He has designed supercomputers for over 2 decades, practiced jitsu, and mastered his fitness. In this episode, he shares his fitness journey, a little bit about supercomputers, if you're interested in that, and how we can go about asking great questions that actually put us on a path towards personal development. I don't want to spoil any more of the show. So without further ado, let's welcome Erik Scott to the show. I'm excited to learn from you. And I do this for like 3 reasons. Number 1, I try to keep the audience in mind. Number 2, I hope you have a great experience. And then 3rd, and this is my selfish reason, I get to learn from fascinating people. So I'm looking forward to it.
Hey, likewise. And I like sharing my story and learning. And, the more I talk about it, the more things resonate. And then people ask interesting questions and so forth. So it all reciprocates. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually listened to one of your episodes you just did with Jeremiah.
Okay.
On that one. It's really well done. I have to say that was a really good episode. It helped me get some insight. But I'm curious. First of all, I have just a question but how do you get into like computing and into that industry? I'm kind of curious how you got started there.
A long time ago, I had a friend, and this was way back in the dial-up days. He's like, he was big into electronics, and I always have been. I had a background. I used to work on and set up like CB radio, ham radio systems with like really large antennas and amplifiers and so forth. And when I was growing up in California, but moving in Texas, this friend said, you got to learn about computers. You got to do something with this computer stuff. Right. So we built one, went to the store and, got all the stuff and built one. And yeah, it just kind of stuck with me. And then I decided to go to school for that.
Oh, nice. So this is the question I had this is kind of a weird side note, and there's computing, regular computing, and then there's supercomputing, and there's also quantum computing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What's kind of the differences between all 3? Because I know computing is kind of what we see today, and then supercomputing, correct me if I'm wrong, is multiple CPUs, and then quantum computing, that's over my head. So
yeah, so regular computing would be, you can almost say like your laptop, my laptop, or, a workstation in the office, or, some remote connectivity to do basic office kind of work. Gaming is maybe a little bit more on the technical computing side because all of the graphics, and you do need a high-speed network. Supercomputing, or AKA high performance computing, is more around solving the world's most challenging science and engineering problems. And that's achieved through distributing systems across multiple computers, right? And what I mean by that is if I take 20,000 of your laptops and put them in a big warehouse or a data center, for the correct technical term, and then connect them with networking, high-speed networking, low latency networking, and then a lot of these models take distributed systems. So there's not enough resources in one single server or one single laptop to run a model. So the code has to distribute across multiple cores or CPUs, or even grab memory from other computers to run. And that's where supercomputing comes into play, where, scientists and engineers are running specific algorithms and doing number crunching to solve the world's most challenging problems, right? And then quantum computing, it's not new, but it's super specific with the software and the code and the problems it's trying to solve. I don't typically touch that stuff too much because it's so super narrow niche, but it's a different type of supercomputer, basically,
Gotcha.
But what really makes it different is the software.
Okay, so it would fall into the category of supercomputing as well. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome. So how did you make this transition then to fitness? Because now you also do that as well.
Yeah, I'm still doing the supercomputing in terms of architecture, design, and so forth. I just love doing it. But, I've been involved with fitness the past 28 years, various fitness modalities, all the way from the regular gym. I almost call it an HVAC gym because it's nice. It's got air conditioning and heating, and then CrossFit where you're in a warehouse and working real hard and there is no HVAC, right? And strength and conditioning gyms where it's just focused on strength and conditioning. Again, those are in warehouses. And then I did rucking, several rucking events with GoRuck. They're led by Special Forces, Special Operations Cadre. And, it's a group event. You train yourself to carry a certain amount of weight in your rucksack and cover a certain amount of miles. There's a GoRuck Light, there's a GoRuck Tough, and a Heavy. The Heavy is 24 hours. The Tough is 12 or so hours, and then the Light is 5 to 6 hours. I've done 4 events. I didn't do a Heavy. I did a Tough, a GoRuck Light, and then I did 2 events to raise money for the Green Beret Foundation, where you ruck a certain amount of miles. And I split that time with, or the miles with a friend of mine in the Special Forces in the Green Beret. And, we decided to pledge for 50 miles. So I took 25 miles. He took 25. The next one we did was 100 miles. He took 50 miles. I took 50 miles. But you could split it up anyway. You could go do the whole 25 miles if you wanted to, or do a 10-mile ruck or 5 or, whatever it took to get to that 25, 50, or 100-mile mark, right? And it was just to raise money. And I've been training jiu-jitsu the past 12 years. So, all of this culmination of fitness, after I got through this back injury and the stem cell recovery, I just decided, I know enough now where I can help people. And, that's where the formation of Energized Dad came from. And, it's to help men and women, globally, right? Online training, but it's, also geared towards, the dad, right? Where, maybe you know nothing about fitness. Maybe you've let yourself go a bit and you don't know where to turn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you could go out, any one of us could go out to the internet and dig up some sort of fitness plan and try to go do something, but it's the accountability aspect of it, right? Who's going to hold you accountable? Who are you going to check in with to make sure you're doing the work right and you're on plan? So, yeah, that's a little bit of backstory there that got me to.
That's so cool. I think because sometimes we, as a society, kind of associate like, we have the brains and then the brawn, and you kind of put the two together. And I think that's cool that you did that. And this is a question I had when I was listening to the episode you did with Jeremiah. And that was, you said when you were younger, you really pushed yourself hard. And that's kind of what led to your injuries. So I'm curious, like, how do you know, I guess, when you're going too hard, but also keep pushing towards, I guess, kind of, because I like to think that I want to strive towards excellence, but there is like a barrier, kind of as you mentioned in that episode, where it can actually work against you. Like, how do we find that?
Yeah, I think, it's what's the goal? What are you pushing yourself for? In my case, it was never quit. And I took never quit a little too far, right? And I wasn't, on a team of people to where if I quit, other people got injured or hurt. It wasn't a military operation of any sense, right? It was just, how can I get better? How can I improve? How can I keep my energy up? How can I feel the difference, see the difference, and keep going? But along the way, I was beating myself up. my joints, everything takes, you have to carry a payload over time. And I think it's just finding the fine line and knowing what your goal is. Because you're not going to train to be good at jujitsu, climb mountains and go hunting and, be a runner all at the same time, right? There's just no way, unless you're some sort of gifted person that just hasn't even noticed how gifted they are. And that's a rare find. But it's also listening to your body. In my case, I was continually hurting 2016 through 2021, 22 timeframe. And early on in days of fitness, you're told to take a rest day, or you're advised, you're coached into rest days, or just you're not in the gym, right?
Mm.
But it's more than that, right? It's having a recovery program that I was really missing in terms of chiropractic care, massage therapy, physical therapy, knowledge of using bands, foam rollers, stretching, listening to my body, and not being, I guess, afraid to go get checked out.
Gotcha. There's almost like a difference maybe between going hard, but then I don't know how to explain it, but maybe like when your body hurts, kind of your mind's telling you to stop. But then there's also like that different kind of pain when you're working out. It's like, hey, you should stop. But it's, I don't know how do you tell, I guess, what type of pain it is there, if that makes sense?
Yeah, there's going to be struggles in fitness just because you're doing something difficult, right? And that's probably a good thing, right? But if you're sleeping at night and you have like these sharp, dull pains, or the pains are kind of like a tingling sensation or a burning sensation, that's different because you're actually injured, right? You're going to have acute inflammation from just ripping and tearing muscles from lifting, running, or whatever it is, right? That's normal, and that gets repaired through rest and proper nutrition, right? But also knowing how to lift properly, how to stay out of trouble, right? I have a good coach. When I train at Atomic Athlete in Austin, Texas, one of the coach would say before we go lift, he's like, look, no one cares how much you lift, including you. You go and put another 5-pound plate on each side of the barbell and hurt yourself, you're the idiot, right? Because no one around you even cares, right? There might be this nice setup of all these weights on a barbell, but really all you're doing is, you should be doing it for yourself. But, think about lifting for purpose and longevity. And if you don't know how to lift, get someone to show you how to lift.
So almost finding the right coaches, the people to teach you. So that kind of brings me to a question. That's, what's your learning process, I guess? Because, you kind of mentioned you aren't afraid to like ask for help from others, but what does your learning process look like? Because you know a lot of stuff and things that are very different.
I'd say it's visual, right? Seeing it over and over, watching somebody do it correctly, having them watch me, right? Or even watching other people get trained, right? It's kind of an assortment of all of it. Because if I take my background as a systems engineer, there's a very methodical approach. You don't get to 5 without 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, right? And there are no shortcuts with any of this. You got to put in the real work. You got to put in the time. And I think, the learning process is just time. I was thinking about this driving away from the gym this morning, like someone that's really good at Olympic weightlifting, like the snatch or other similar moves, like that takes years to perfect and move the barbell efficiently. I saw a gentleman just loading up for a deadlift, had, there was just more 45-pound plates on there than the bar could fit. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. I was just warming up, stretching, and it was the worst form ever. It was the absolute worst form ever. Like if a coach saw me do that, I'd hope he'd just kick me, so I could fall over and, just send me home, because the back was arched, it was just like this. If you could see what that was doing to the back, it would be terrible. Right. Um, so you really got to step back sometimes and don't let the ego get in the way, because the weights don't care.
Exactly. I like that point there too. Ego kind of gets in the way. And I'm guilty of this too, where you'll go into something, you'll be like, oh, I got this, right? Like it can't be that hard. And then you realize it's actually really hard. And it reminds me of the book, Malcolm Gladwell's book, where it takes 10,000 hours to really become good at anything, like excellent. So that being said, 10,000 hours is a long time. How do you, I guess, maintain that patience? And maintain that patience, but also like when times get tough, like keep moving forward, or when you encounter setbacks.
Yeah. Bruce Lee had a saying is, I'm not afraid of the man that's kicks 10,000 times. I'm afraid of the man that's kicked one kick 10,000 times. Right. Cause it's just ultimately perfected. You have to really just not be in a rush. Same with jiu-jitsu. Even after 12 years, we practice the same moves over and over and over for self-defense. And even after 12 years, you're in a seminar, you're in, a multi-hour event, and, the professors are going over various moves. You're like, I've never seen that slight difference before, but this made the move so much more efficient. Right. And it's just being patient, and it's part of the long game. I think you have to suffer. If it's not difficult, you're either not doing it right, or it's just too easy in the first place. It's kind of, I've seen that too with my coaches. I thought I was doing well, and they're like, no, hold on, just adjust here, adjust there. And you're like, whoa, this got way harder. With 2 adjustments, right? And they're like, they walk away and smile, and they're like, well, yeah, now you're doing it right. Or you're doing it how I'm telling you to do it, Now work on that for however long it takes, I think you just have to be good with repetition and accepting repetition, right? Because with anything, you don't need to be advanced. If you're really good at the fundamentals, at that point you are advanced, right? You're just polishing the fundamentals, right? So yeah. That's kind of the goal that I step back with.
Speaking of goals, I'm sure you've got goals coming in this new year. What's your strategy when it comes to setting goals and making sure that there's action behind it? I mean, we kind of mentioned this also, accountability. I think that's a big part when it comes to achieving your goals. How do you go about setting up, if you were to just do a goal for yourself, how would you go about that?
I want a plan. I got to develop a plan. If I know how to build a plan, I'm going to go hire someone to help me build a plan, right? Like a mentor or a coach or an advisor. Even after my stem cell therapy, and, that's probably the highest level of self-development you could probably do for yourself in most cases. Right. And I felt I was overweight. Even though I knew how to eat correctly, I was over consuming some things, and things just fell out of balance. I went and hired a coach, and I lost 20 pounds in 3 months.
Dang.
And, it was about recognizing that I didn't have it figured out anymore. I slipped, right? And knowing that I slipped, don't spend the time trying to fix it. Let someone else fix it, and then let me be held accountable to that plan, So that's what I would say. Yeah.
I like that. And this is something that just kind of really stood out to me, as you said, you have no hesitation when there's a problem to reach out and ask someone else to either fix it or ask for help. But in some cases, it does require work on your end to fix it. I don't necessarily want to challenge that, but at some point, don't you need to take like personal responsibility for that and try and work at that problem yourself, if that kind of makes sense?
Well, I could have, right? But the feedback I was getting from my wife, family, and friends, and I was slipping in the areas of nutrition. I was probably drinking a little too much. I needed someone to course correct me and say, "Wake the fuck up," because you don't have it figured out, right? So if you can really step back into your own house and say, "I know everything I need to do. I'm going to do it." But if you're not doing it, there has to be some denominator change that's going to drive you to get better, right? And if you haven't done it yet, there has to be some sort of life event to wake you up, right?
Hmm.
And sometimes you just learn more, right, by working with someone else. Could I have stepped back and looked at some old nutrition plans from previous nutrition coaches and said, yeah, this looks close enough to what I can do or what I should do, and do some calculations on my total daily energy expenditure and all of this. And yeah, but in this case, I decided to go hire someone and just help me course correct. But you are right. And what I'm hearing there is, and what that resonates to me is, I had to self rescue, right? I was recognizing I had an issue, and I just spent all this money on stem cell treatment. I needed to get better overall on how I approached every day. So self rescue means either fix yourself or work with someone to fix yourself, right? No one's coming to save you, right? Even if you're injured, what are you going to do? Like, you go see a doctor, or you're there for a little while, but guess what? You come back home and who's there? Even if there is someone there, they can't really help you. Like, maybe what are they going to do? Change a bandage or something, or help you put socks on, or, it's up to you, right? To self rescue, right? Because I always like to think of it as no one's coming to save you, right? Even if you have a medical emergency, right? There's going to be someone that's going to come and get you, potentially, right? If you're still breathing, even in major cities, it takes, first responders 7 to 8 minutes, maybe 10 minutes to get to you. And whatever condition you're in by that time, you're still going to get a limited amount of treatment. You're still going to get dropped off at a hospital, brought somewhere. And then when you're done at that stay, it's still up to you, right? To get yourself right. So you can either decide, I'm gonna bandage myself up and keep going, or I'm gonna bring a physical therapist over here and help me out every day, or I'm gonna go see one. But I think you have to think of it from a focus of, what kind of team can I put together to help me?
I like that. And thank you for the hospital analogy. That actually helped illustrate it pretty well. And I'd love to get your thoughts kind of on my interpretation here. But usually those first, like, identifying the problem or realizing there's a problem is you, right? You got to call 911, whatever it may be. And then there's going to be people that help you along the way. But then let's say in some cases, maybe you're going into the hospital because of something you did, or like there's something else that caused it. It would be foolish to just go back out and start doing the same thing. You'd obviously go in with more caution and say, okay, how do I prevent this from happening again? Because that experience was miserable.
Yep.
And kind of reshaping your mind in a way of saying, okay, I need to go do something different, so then this terrible thing that happened to me never happens again.
Yeah, and part of that is letting your own ego get out of your way, right? Because maybe you know what to do, and that's fine. Just do it, right? But if you're semi hesitant, or you're not sure of the outcome, or what the path is, and what the end result should be, and a lined out way to get there, like, why waste time?
Because time is precious.
Yeah. It's like waiting time to call 911. Well, I think I can bandage myself up. I can do this. I can do that. No, I've done a lot of bleed control training with, first responders and, Green Berets that are 18 Delta medics. And when you go to treat someone, you know what the advisory from those guys is?
What?
call 911 first and get that motherfuckers going on en route to you, and then you help the person, right? It's kind of like when the mask is supposed to fall down on the airplane, put it around your loved one first and then put it to you, right? But yeah, if in terms of putting tourniquets on and plugging a big hole that's maybe gushing with blood, yeah, get that done, but call for help, and that's kind of, I think that's the big hesitancy I see with a lot of people is they know they need to do something, but they're like, I need to think about it first.
So this is something I have that I want to ask, and that's sometimes when you go to ask for help, like you sense there's a problem, but you don't really know the right question to ask in the first place. So how do you kind of come to that right question? Or when you want to go ask that person, like, hey, I have this problem, could you help, or whatever, and maybe they don't even recognize the problem themselves. How do we kind of get there? Because I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying here, but
yeah, I would say if you're trying to reach a goal over and over and you're spinning your wheels and you think you're good enough to get there and you're not getting there, like your plan sucks, right? And go talk to an expert operating at several levels above you in the area of focus that you want to work on, right? And you don't necessarily have to have a polished statement, because they should be knowledgeable enough to pick apart your problem and come up with the solution, right? I honestly, if I was the person, I'm like, dude, I'm fat. Like, I don't even know what to do anymore. What do you think I should do? Well, if it's someone that knows what to do, like, look, you're going to wake up at 5 a.m. every day. You're going to stop the drinking. You're going to go to the gym before everyone else wakes up. We're going to put you on a nutrition plan, certain amount of protein per day in grams, certain amount of carbs, certain amount of fat, and you're going to do nothing but this for the next 90 days, right? But see, in that case, I didn't really say, hey, man, I've been trying to do this diet thing. It doesn't work. Well, you can say all that, but at the end of the day, the person you're going to ask for help with is just waiting for you to be quiet so they can help you, right? You could just literally just say, I'm lost, and that's also music to someone else's ears that likes to help people, right? Because sometimes if you overthink it, I've seen people do that. They want to start picking apart the advice they're getting from the professional, and here's the thing too, that we're talking about: be coachable. And being coachable means listen, be quiet and listen, and just go do what you're asked to do.
I like that. So how do you go about selecting your team and your professionals that you surround yourself with? Because I'm going to use sports as an analogy, but when building a team, you obviously need a lot of great players and to do specific tasks in order to achieve the goal you want. So how do you go about selecting a great team, I guess is the question.
I do a fair amount of research, right? I look at who's well put together, who's well known. What does their facility look like? What is their daily process? If I'm at a gym, how do they carry themselves? Is the gym clean? Can you go to the corner of the gym and find a bunch of dust? And what does the bathroom look like if you're in a jiu-jitsu gym, or an academy? Maybe references from people, but also who's trained them. Where did they learn from? What's the heritage? What's the lineage, right, of their knowledge set? And stuff like that. And also, how do they approach you, right? I work with some coaches that are just really good dudes. That they're badasses. They'll scare the hell out of you just looking at you, But that's okay because they're good. This isn't like Halloween, right? I'm not worried about how scared I get, I'm worried about, if I put my time in here, am I going to get some results, right? But, it's a gamble. Sometimes you don't really know. You could do all the research and it could just be a total disaster, right? Maybe you don't fit in, right? Maybe it's not a good fit. Maybe that coach is way too busy and it's just taking on more people than they need to, or, whatever the case, or maybe that person's going through some personal tribulations, right? Because we're all human, sometimes, the jiu-jitsu professors and others, they're looked at like some super person, superhero or whatever. But no, everyone wakes up the same way, puts their pants on the same way, and keeps going, right? It just takes time, these things, but if you find a good team or a good coach, you got to be a good person yourself, you know. Just do the work, be coachable.
Coachable. I was just going to say that. I think so. I guess, what are some of the qualities that embody being coachable? Like, what should you bring to the table to be coachable and willing to learn from others?
A willingness to learn, be a sponge, keep your mind open. Don't ask like so many questions all the time where you're almost challenging, your coach or your professor, right? And you don't need to look over for confirmation all the time when you're doing what the coach is asking you to do. They're watching you, right? And take care of yourself, take care of your body, do the right amount of nutrition, get rest, show up ready to go, ready to work, right? Don't show up, oh man, Sunday was a big blowout at the ball game with my buddies. Like, that's your problem. It's not the coach's problem. It's not, who's ever running the fitness class. Like, they're putting everything they have in to make it a good experience. And if you're dragging your rear end in the door because you were up too late, or, you ran the whole weekend, having fun, and it takes you up until Wednesday to where you feel normal again, you're wasting time. You're wasting everybody's time, and go there to do the work. Don't go there for social hour.
I like that.
Everyone has a different agenda about some of that, because, people like to go to these coached, sessions and chat, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But when it's time to do the work and focus on what you're being taught, right? Because the goal should be, what can I learn that's going to help me later? Are they going to teach me some lifts, some particular moves that this is going to be more of a foundational movement and I'm going to be able to leverage going forward,
I think on that, you said something earlier about not asking questions, and I have to partially disagree there. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes questions can really get to the root of maybe problems you may have. It's like, and especially with that willingness to learn, I think asking questions can really get you there faster. So can you kind of maybe offer some clarity there? Like, what do you think asking questions becomes a bad or doesn't work in your favor?
Yeah. I can tell you in terms of jiu-jitsu, when we're at the academy, you've got a professor on the mat that's showing the move with another person, right? And this is the move that you're going to take your partner and go work on with, right? Someone always has to, you're asked, are there any questions? And usually there's folks that'll regardless ask a question just because they need to ask a question. Like, well, what if the person was 2 steps to the left? Or what if they were coming up behind you? Or what if this person was 20 more pounds than they are right now? Well, that's not what we're learning. We're learning like exactly what you're being shown. And those, I've even had professors say, look, don't ask questions, ask questions. And then it was a group of probably about 100 people, and someone asked a question. And then the professor said, that's exactly what I just said, don't ask questions about. This generalization of these different scenarios, right? A good question is really specific to what you're being asked to go do. Is an adjustment to the movement. Maybe you're injured. You can't do it correctly, right? Maybe you need an alternative, but it's a pinpoint question against, what you're being taught or being asked to do, right? People like to ask these generalizations in questions. You see that in corporate America. People ask questions just so they sound smart, like you're listening, you know. Most of the time, honestly, yeah, you're right? Questions are good, but most of the time, you don't need to ask questions. Yeah.
I just had a thought here. It almost has to be tied with an action, right? Like kind of what you said, like instead of like asking them directly, it's you saying, oh, hey, what would we do in this situation? Instead it'd be like, all right, I'm here right now. How would I move let's say my elbow or my wrist? Would it be higher up here? Like something where you're already there.
Yeah.
And then asking the question.
Specific. Yeah. Specific to, maybe it's a bench press and you're asking how, should my wrist be locked out or slight angle? Which direction should I grab the bar? Or if it's a choke in jujitsu, how far over do I move my arm before I fold the other arm behind the neck? And something ultra specific. Yeah. That you just, if you don't ask the question, like you're going to go back and not get it right, or you're going to need someone to come help you anyhow. And maybe you do. Maybe you need someone to come help you regardless, right? But yeah, you're right on that.
So this is just another thought too. So if you're a beginner, let's say, and you're just starting out, maybe sometimes you have to ask those. For now, let's just call them stupid questions where they're maybe general because you really don't know. I guess how would you make sure? I don't want to phrase it like that, but you want to make sure that you're not repeating the question over and over, right? You should probably get it the first time, and if you ask it a second time, maybe ask with more ask with more detail. But man, sorry, I'm having a trouble.
No, that's good. I think at the beginner level, you're going to need help regardless, and a good professor in jiu-jitsu or a coach, they're going to know that, right? They're probably going to pair you up with someone that has a fair amount of knowledge that can help you, especially as a white belt. Just say jiu-jitsu, right? You're going to get paired up with a blue, purple, brown belt, right? Or even maybe another white belt that's been working and has more experience, right? If it's a lifting move and you're kind of solo, the coach, if you're at a place that has a coach and it's maybe a group of 10, 15, whatever the, number is, they're going to eventually come around and work with you, but you're just on a learning curve, right? You just have to get in there and do the work. Sometimes I just watch other people, right, that have maybe been there a while, right? You don't want to learn you don't want to learn, bad habits and just execute bad habits all the time, right? And the coaches they move around, they're watching. They're watching. But yeah, as someone new, you got to dive in, and another piece of that is don't go too heavy. Don't lift. Don't do something beyond your capability that's going to put you or the person you're working with in some sort of scenario that's not going to end up good.
I like that. So I think now you're at a point where you're now dishing out the advice and you're coaching in certain areas. Can you kind of like maybe share some insight on at what point did you kind of recognize, hey, like maybe I'm not so much I need to be more of a coach. I mean, you're still learning and always will be a lifelong student, but maybe I need to transition more to a coach.
Yeah, I think, when I look around and I just see the amount of people that are lost and out of shape and, you're supposed to be the guiding light for your family and maybe your career's slipping. It's you're giving too much of your time to your work, or maybe you're waking up and the first thing you do is you got to go act on things for everybody else but yourself, right? It's kind of like how do I take all of my knowledge and the discipline I've invoked on myself to get better over all these years, and then teach people in a practical manner how to improve, but from a real basic fundamental level, right? Like we talked about earlier, get up early. If everyone's asleep and you're going to go do the gym, and you don't want to wake everybody up in the house, like prepare the night before, set your running shoes to the side, set your workout clothes to the side, maybe prepare your coffee, do smart stuff the day before to prepare. A lot of people just aren't doing simple stuff. Like, it's there's not a lot to it. It's, just eat smart, eat within your calorie range, do some basic strength and conditioning training, because muscle powers health. As you get older, you start losing muscle mass. And, all the good studies out there show, like, if you, in your older years, if you fall and end up in the hospital and you don't have a lot of muscle mass left on you, it's not going to work out good. So as you get older too, that muscle starts just disappearing, right? And how do you go from this, young 20s to, lifting as much as you want, doing as much as you want, doing everything you want, to a later part in your life where I'm at, where you're like, now it's about the long game. It's about training for preservation and being around for my daughter and my family. And I think it's just a culmination of saying, okay, I know enough to where I could help people out and see a fair amount of success. I just, my brother's on my program, and you would think, well, that's risky, because training a family member probably isn't, can go a bunch of different ways. He lost 27 pounds in the past 4 months.
Dang.
And he's super happy, and his wife's like, how much more skinny is he going to get? And I said, well, he was fat in the first place. So let's not start gauging skinny, when he's ripped up, chopped up, and has veins popping and abs, are you going to call that skinny? I'm not. I'm going to call it like, hey, let's take a damn photo, and send it around the internet.
Get some recognition.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's just a point where I'm good at helping people because I've studied leadership. I've read a fair amount of books on leadership from military leaders, and, you gotta be able to listen to people, right? Just like you said, with these questions, listen to people, help them understand where they're at, but also know when to just tell people, you need to stop doing what you're doing and go do this plan.
I like that. Well, Erik, thank you. Thank you for sharing. I've learned a lot. I know those tuning in have learned a lot as well. Just real quick, what's the best way they can find you, reach out to you, all that fun stuff if they want to learn more about you, connect with you?
Instagram. I put out my daily life, my fitness routines, my eating, the macro plan, daily discipline, and everything's on Instagram at Erik L. Scott, ERIK LSCOTT. And you got any questions, just look me up, send me a message, we'll chat, and happy to answer questions and tell you about what's going on. But yeah, the other thing too is, back even after the stem cell recovery with my low back, and I hired the coach to lose 20 pounds. I put all that out there. I'm not showing up like, hey, look at this, like super fit guy. Like, I showed the downside, right? And I show, if you go back far enough, you'll see that, right? And you'll see the course correction, and you'll see what proper nutrition and a fitness program can do, and then the energy that it brings, right? So yeah, I'm just kind of, there's no smoke and mirrors,
I like that. And we need more of that, right? In today's online world.
Yeah, appreciate it. That's a fact.
Well, thank you, Erik, for sharing the stuff you did today. So thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, it's been great.
All right, everyone, as you can tell, that is Erik Scott. He's a very intelligent person, has great things to share. I challenge you guys, if anything spoke to you, to reach out to him. He dropped his information there for you guys. Stay tuned till next week. We have a great guest lined up for you guys. See you guys next week, and let's get after it. Hey everyone, if you liked this episode and would like to hear more, be sure to hit that subscribe or follow button. We release a new episode every Wednesday for you guys to listen to. Thank you guys so much for the support that you give. We could not have done this without you guys. If you would like to be a potential guest on the show, check out intelligentconvos.com and fill out the form there. Thank you guys again, and let's get after it.